Welcome to Rauta, I am Jerry, and once again we go one of those retrospective videos. And by now, if you haven't really figured it out just yet, I'm focusing on the bands that I have interviewed, so I can actually link these two together, the retrospective and the interview. Makes sense, doesn't it? So let's go, because Cannibal Corpse whole discography is vast, it's big, it's majestic, it's really epic in terms of how many years the band has been active, how many tours, how many albums and whatnot the band has been doing. This video will be probably way too lengthy, but first we will already go all this. I listened to the whole discography a couple of times, focus on the albums, however, not really digging, those compilations and whatnot, because they don't really bring much additional value to the whole thing. But MCDs, full albums and all. I also read most of the lyrics. I went through pretty much all the lyrics on the albums. If I missed something on the demo, whatever side, that's sad. But, this is enough to kind of summarize you the whole thing going on. I also obviously paid attention to the album covers, which I have been doing for the past few years and all that stuff. So probably there are not lots of surprises for you. This is not totally worst to best video either, because, well, that is focused on the bands that are not active anymore, disbanded and what have you. So the focus is just to bring you a little bit of idea what Cannibal Corpse is all about, some things you might have missed, some anecdotes, or maybe you just never really bothered to listen to the music, and I might give you some reasons why to check out their music, art, lyrics, whatsoever, bring you a little bit this and that, or maybe this has no absolute value to you at all. That's up for you to decide, obviously, but I'll try to make this recap so that you will find something of interest, something to consider and all that stuff. Anyway, let's do it and start going on through Cannibal Corpse. One of those really, really most successful death metal bands of all time. We can probably argue that it's actually the most successful death metal band of all time, because it's been selling millions of albums, touring all the time, doing albums every couple of years. Really, that's fantastic. But what is even more fantastic is the quality of the music they have been putting out throughout the years. Honestly, this is totally honestly, and I can say Cannibal Corpse never made a mediocre album, not even let alone a weak one. There are lots of bands, especially when you have like 10 albums or more, that the bands start to fail, their mediocrity, their fillers and all that stuff. And it's kind of understandable. It's hard to really maintain the quality throughout the years, album after album, especially when you have band members getting older, band members getting replaced and all that stuff. And of course, Cannibal Corpse is not immune to that thing. They have had various lineup changes throughout the years, but two things seem to be solid since 1988 when the band started. That's Paul Matskurevich, I don't know how to pronounce this, the original drummer who still goes on and who I got to interview a few years ago. Nice person, really smart, nice, talented. Even if you can totally challenge him about his drumming style and all. He's not the most technical out there, but he has totally nailed so-called Cannibal Corpse drumming style. Then we have obviously Alex Webster, the bass master. We actually called him like Spider Fingers back in the days, because he would be literally doing the bass lines. We are like, wow, you really can't fake that shit. Now, even though most of the members have been in the band for a long, long time, they're not original ones, like Rob Barrett, who joined Guitars in 1993. So now, more than 30 years in the band, but he had his hiatus, came back still almost 20 years ago, so a really, really long time member. Also, George Corpse Crider Fisher, the biggest neck in the business, a helicopter head roller dude, always very, very charismatic and fun on stage, and really one of the best death metal voices on earth, in my opinion. But what is more fascinating is also that Eric Ruan, he used to be the sixth member of the band as a producer and later on as a guitarist, joined the band in 2020 after certain incidents when certain past members got out of the band. That is Pat O'Brien, who got convicted for arsons and whatnot. A really weird story. He was a long-timer in the band, so more than 20 years. And of course we have Chris Barnes, who were there in the band for early years, becoming one of the kind of landmark names, milestone names in the whole death metal department, because he joined the band in 1988 as an original member, but then later on went to 6 Feet Under and whatnot. Then there are a couple of others, very key members. Jack Owen, who was a guitarist for a long time in the band, and some say the band got more boring when he got off the thing and all that stuff. Actually, curious joining 6 Feet Under later on. So things are not as simple as always, but what matters, in my opinion, is how is the quality. Now, because I could actually go for on and on about the band from various angles, starting with the lyrics or cover art, whatever, I decided to do, let's go from the chronological order, because that actually makes sense in retrospective things when Eaten Back to Life 1990 got out. And as a lot of those albums, late 80s and early 90s, this still has a kind of a dead trash feeling. Obviously, it's pure death metal, but when you really listen to the songs on this album, you will feel like, yeah, there are trashier parts. Much like, say early Death Has or early Morbid Angel, the debut album. So it kind of comes with the territory when death metal and thrash metal were kind of a like inseparable thing, really. That is talking about Possessed, for instance. So that's exactly where Cannibal Corpse kind of joined the play or the fray, and later on started to get rid of those thrash metal, more like they got overshadowed by the more pure blood death metal elements. In my opinion, this is already a really, really good debut album because it features strong songs. I mean, the whole track list here, and doesn't go on for too lengthy. It's 35 minutes and then some, and also showcase the brutal art here, including these lyrical warning and that may offend. And mind you, this is curious, when we're talking about cancel culture, usually people get to forget that early 90s cancel culture was even more stronger than nowadays, meaning bands like Cannibal Corpse and Rotten Christ were banned in countries like Germany. Why? Not because they had racist topics or were Nazi bands or anything like that. They were seemed dangerous because of the violence. Rotten Christ's name was already like, oh shit, this is going to piss religious people off, and probably did, so it seemed deemed too dangerous to exist. Same thing for Cannibal Corpse for different reasons. I mean, Germany, among other countries, were actually ready to cancel or ban bands because they had too much violence that went from video games to movies, but also music. And Cannibal Corpse was cancelled or banned in Germany for a bit before they could actually go on. I wouldn't be surprised still if some of the early albums, like Eaten Back to Life, Butchered at Birth, and stuff like that were, banned. Because, I mean, this style is very graphic, even if it's very comic book-like. I mean, come on, there are babies or skeletal babies hanging from the ceiling. Obviously dead and all that stuff, and their guts and blood and gore and undead people. Undead. How can you take it seriously? Now, what is funny about the cover art, before we go into more details, is that throughout the years they had the same cover artist doing all the art. And while it's not the most beautiful in the world, it really helped Cannibal Corpse define their style. Much like Iron Maiden had their Eddie, but Cannibal Corpse still kept going on even more in the same vein, and I think that's beautiful. Same thing can be said about the lyrics. What started with the debut album really got going on later and later on, even if some members got changed. But back to the music. So what started in Eaten Back to Life was defined a little bit different at Butchered at Birth. Only 1 year later, though, the trashier elements got more or less gone. They got more focusing on the whole death metal thing, and it became like one of those landmark albums, like, okay, this is the new chapter. Basically, the first album is like extended demo, but a good sound, good quality and all, and that's where it started and hasn't really changed. What is peculiar, however, this is just seen as a death metal band, not brutal death metal bands. And then again, a lot of newer bands are seen brutal death metal bands, and in my opinion, they are not more brutal than Cannibal Corpse. I'm not saying Cannibal Corpse is like the most brutal band in the world. Obviously not. But, I mean, they're definitely more on the brutal end of things rather than the basic death metal bands. I mean, there are way many bands that are just labeled death metal and are more melodic, easy to approach, catchier and all that shit, versus what Cannibal Corpse is. So it goes beyond me why this is just defined death metal, but maybe this is a little bit of a revisionist take from people like saying like, this is the death metal because that's what death metal was all about. And later on it was like, said, this is brutal death metal. It's like almost like, this is beer, beer. Brutal beer. Well, whatever. I don't really care, but it's just funny. Then Doom of the Mutilated continued where the previous album went on. Nothing really changed that much in my opinion, but that's where the first so-called hit songs happened, like Hammer Smashed Face, Icon Blood. Some of those songs which are still played often as either the ending songs, or the hit songs where you're like, you want to hear some more, this is about me coming out of blood and out of my cock and all. So it's crazy that early on they got to define those songs, and in my opinion, they are not even among the best songs. Well, Hammer Smash Face is, but like Icon Blood, it's not that great of a song. Great title, I mean, it's kind of a visceral and all, but still. Then there is Bleeding, which in my opinion has one of the best death metal starters ever, like riffs, stripped, raped, strangled. Just listen to the early parts. That's just wonderful use of stereo system as well as riffing, guitars. Wow, I think it's mind-blowing, really, really that good. And once again, the topics go throughout that stuff, but I'll get back to that later on. Now, in my opinion, however, this is around the year when it started a little bit decline versus the early works. And among these albums, I would say The Bleeding is among the weakest, with Tomb of the Mutilated. I mean, Tomb of the Mutilated is probably the weakest Cannibal Corpse album for me. That is not to say it's weak, because I mean, like I said, all of these are good, 4 stars or better. But I think with Vile, which some people won't definitely agree with me, they cut up. And it also has one of what I would consider one of those hit songs, Devoured by Vermin. This is actually also the album where Corpse Grinder got into the band. So nowadays it might seem like, wow, that was an eternity ago. But if you really think about it, they already had 5 albums in by that time. The Bleeding, when you take a look at here, has Chris Barnes. Nothing really changed in my opinion that much in terms of the vocal things. Both are good vocalists, obviously. I mean, Barnes more like was, not that great with 6 Feet Under, but still. But in my opinion, the transition phase wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, compared to a lot of other bands out there. I mean, it was like, okay, we got a good death metal vocalist, now he's gone, we got another good one. And while obviously there are differences, the change was not that big. But I remember being, back in the days, a little bit, bored or disappointed with albums like Gallery of Suicide and all that stuff. Maybe I was just too much in the black metal department around this time, and I wasn't really fascinated by albums such as this. And as such, it was in my back of my head like, okay, this is not that good of an album. I'm probably gonna get disappointed by that one when I go to the discography. And I was like, more like, hey, this is actually better than I remember it to be. That was followed by Bloodthirst. And so back in the 1990s, I mean, given that the band was started in 1988 and the first album in 1990, I mean, here like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 albums in. Within 10 years if you count the year 0. That's quite of a pace if you really think about it, including all the touring and EP, Hammer Smash Face, compilation, what have you. Well, compilations are compilations. They don't really count, but still. Now, in my opinion, they went for better direction, even better, still being solid and all, after Gore Obsessed and, The Wretched Spawn, which I think is one of the best Cannibal Corpse albums. All of these are solid. Like I said, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but whatever here is, there's nothing out of ordinary. But for some reason, album like The Wretched Spawn is just very, very powerful album. There are no instant hits, like I said, there are some ones on the early albums. But overall, I think this is a really, really powerful album. I mean, all of them are powerful, but some are better than the rest, so there's that. Kill is another one that is a good success, but I would put The Wretched Spawn on top of it. Another of my favorites is Evisceration Plague 2009. This is what I see in a way kind of like the sibling album with the Wretched Spawn. There's something that really kind of just clicks me the right way. Now, then there was Torture, and there was actually this EP what I want to mention. This is often overlooked because, well, it's a cover song thing, partially, with Demon Knight, Confessions by Possessed, No Remorse, Metallica, by the way, really, really good cover. But I mean, as a release, this EP is wonderful. 22 minutes, 6 songs, really powerful, good covers, and some good songs too. Often overlooked, I don't see people talking about it, and I think it's a really, really good EP. Now, after Evisceration Plague, like I said, it's one of my favorites. They got the Torture, another good one. But then they little bit dipped, in my opinion. Skeletal Domain is one of the modern era Cannibal Corpse albums, which I feel like is a little bit of a letdown after so many good albums. Like said, all are good once again, but when you separate the great from the good, there's difference. However, they got back big time with Red Before Black, which is kind of like really restored my faith and kind of brought me back to like, wow, I really got to go back to listen to the whole discography. That was in 2017 after I reviewed Red Before Black. And that's when I rediscovered kind of like Cannibal Corpse is actually a way better band than I given credit to. And ever since 2017, I've been more active keeping Cannibal Corpse in my mind because, well, it's actually that good of a band, but it's easy to overlook like people in black metal do to Dimmu Borgir. It's not that good of a band. They're too successful, too basic, and they don't really redefine themselves or whatnot. But I'm like, hey, Cannibal Corpse is good. If you don't like classic death metal, then don't. But you can't really deny that in their own box, their own genre, it's a really good band. And talking about albums and bands and all that stuff, well, Violence Unimagined is my favorite Cannibal Corpse album. I mean, it's so powerful, the whole production and all that stuff. Eric Rudan probably meant a lot for this band at this phase, and it was like, wow, how can this old band do their best album more than 30 years in the business? I feel it's like hard to understand it and all that stuff. However, in terms of that, Chaos Horrific was a little bit of a disappointment basically because 2 albums prior to that were so goddamn powerful. So all in all, 16 good albums. I mean, like I said, all the albums are at least 4 stars, and in some cases I would say 4.5 out of 5 or 9 out of 10, including albums such as Violence Unimagined. Maybe that's the only one I would actually give a 9er, but that's a different story. Now, when it comes to the covers, which I quickly went through, I'm not gonna go into detail because this would be an hour full of video, but all these covers, some are about skeletons and undead and what have you. But if you really think about it, a lot of these, I mean, think about these gore themes. They keep repeating themselves. Here is a person stabbing with some sort of a knife, machete, whatever. This is the censored one, but I still one of my favorite covers with the really, really horrible creature. The non-censored one is more brutal in a way, but also more comical. I like this censored version even more because this is more like a close caption kind of a thing. Or this latest one, Chaos Horrific. This is kind of like getting back to the classics. Undeads, violence, chopping, gunning down these undeads and all. It's so crazy. It's so comical. It's like a horror comic book thing, which you really have going on. But that's also the trademark thing. Because Cannibal Corpse is like, okay, we do an album full of gore, killings and all that stuff. And that's what the covers are all about. And I think it's a good thing because they kind of show what it's all about. I mean, certain products are like that. And that's a good thing, obviously. You don't change what is working, what is kind of seen as classic, a trademark of a thing. Now, when it comes to lyrics, I've got a little bit challenged here with someone has written on Metal Archives of themes. Necrophilia, well, sure, tiny bit. Misogyny, early. Okay, this is something where I want to challenge. Sure, the early works have some murder and rape or whatever fantasies about, female targets. Now, it might seem as a misogyny, but if you really think about real-life serial killers, that's exactly what's going on. And why? Because female targets are easier than a rough guy. And also when it comes to, certain very, very disturbing topics such as rape, obviously female target are that. That doesn't mean that it's actually misogyny. It's just like kind of recapping what the serial killers and rapists are all about. So I find it a little bit like misleading. That's like, in my opinion, misunderstanding what the lyrics are all about. I'm not here to defend whatever the the author of the lyrics, decided to do. But when I was going through these lyrics, I think it's a little bit misunderstanding the whole topics. Then there are, of course, gore, death, torture, cannibalism, zombies, other undeads. But there are even more, like on the early albums, Eaten Back to Life, there's a story about a violent car accident when limbs or whatever are thrown out of the windows and shit like that happens. So there are stories, but the early works are more just like, let's add brutal words one after another. Rotten brain, gore, limbs severed, and all that. Yeah, it's kind of naive and all that stuff. And at some point it started to become more telling a story. The actually funny thing is, like when you go through these 16 albums, which is quite of a lot, I felt the same thing happening when I was doing Amon Amarth retrospective, because there was this moment when you're reading too many Viking lyrics after one another, you kind of everything kind of gets blurry. It's like Viking raid here, Viking fight there, Viking vengeance, Viking death, Viking whatever. Now here is a lot of same things: serial killer torturing, eating the corpse, putting some gore here or there, blah, 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 blah. It's just gore, death, torture in various orders. And there are lots of topics where you seem like the same story is being told again. Now, there are also undead stories, and when I mention a Monomath thing, there are actually Viking lyrics even, though it doesn't directly mention Vikings, but the kind of a Blood Eagle thing, if you know what I'm talking about, is also present there. So topics are pretty much like here, but instead of misogyny, I would say it's more like serial killing and all that stuff. And I wouldn't say that necrophilia was that much present, even though probably sex with the dead corpses and all that stuff was a little bit more dominating on the early works rather than later on, when the things kind of started more like storytelling thing. And say there's lots of vengeance stories. This person deciding to do vengeance upon this one and whatever. And then there are lots of like, oh, I'm gonna die kind of a thing. So like first person suffering or death point of view. Not that much change really, but obviously if you are a band doing 16 albums plus, EPs, whatever, yeah, you start repeating yourself. Especially if you have boxed yourself in a certain genre of things. Like if you're gonna do horror stories or serial killings or whatever, of course you're kind of bound to do that. Now, overall, to recap the whole thing is, like I said, throughout the 16 years, more than 30 years in the business, Cannibal Corpse have proved why they are so successful. They always have good production, they always have super good vocals, guitar work, bass works, even the drumming, which is sometimes like, it's not that good. I kind of want to disagree. I mean, it's not the most technical one, but it's not really a punk drumming. And there's certain own style in the whole thing, which I wouldn't even change because it would change the whole characteristics of the whole band. Overall, I would say there's a reason why Cannibal Corpse is such a successful act in terms of death metal. A good band with so much history, so much music, and you really can't challenge that in so many ways. There are lots of bands who made a couple of good albums, maybe even 5, but try doing 16 good albums and you get my respect. I've seen them many times live, never been disappointed, especially later years when I feel like I gotten more to respect what they do, both on albums, both on tours. And of course, I was really happy to get them for interview a few years ago when they played in my home city. So big respect to the Cannibal Corpse era, history, legacy, what have you. And I urge you to actually go through the whole discography if you really like death metal. They are worth your time, unless you're really allergic to death metal, in which case you probably are just wasting your time. But a good band for sure. Check out the interview I did back in the days. And listen to the music. Music is just so good, and Cannibal Corpse are the kings among the whole genre. Now, off I go with this lengthy video. I hope you enjoyed it, and more retrospective videos coming to you in coming weeks and months. Off you go. Bye-bye.